Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am so sorry that I didn't post a new episode last week. I took a week off after CrimeCon Denver because, hello, I had no voice, especially after such a huge conference. Shout out to all my new listeners who are here after discovering the show at CrimeCon, and a special note to those listeners who, no kidding, found me years ago at CrimeCon, whether it was Vegas or Orlando, and they made it a note to stop by my table just to say hi. I do want to take a minute also to say thank you to a woman that I met there. Her name is Josephine Wenzel, and I met her in person after having spoken to her a few years back on Facebook. You might recall that Josephine Wenzel is Crystal Mitchell's mother. I covered Crystal's case a few years ago when her alleged murderer, Raymond McLeod, was still a fugitive. He was ultimately captured in 2022, and his trial is set to take place this year, 2025, in October in California. Josephine was such a kind person, and meeting her just filled my heart with pure joy. At CrimeCon, I also met a medical examiner who performed the autopsy on two cases that I covered. Mr. Jim Caruso performed the autopsy of Ashley Turner. It's a case that I covered out of Iceland, and that is on my Patreon. And he also performed the autopsy on Pat Tillman. And I did a two-part episode on Pat Tillman. To say that I met some pretty amazing people in Denver is a complete understatement because everybody was amazing. All that to say, thank you to everyone who listens and watches this show on a weekly basis. Sometimes I wonder, no kidding, wonder if I should keep going on. And meeting you is always a confirmation that these cases need to be told. All right, let's get into today's case. Today's case is about a 16-year-old by the name of Josephine Jimenez. And this case is out of California. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Our story begins on October 14th, 2019 in Madera, California. 16-year-old Josephine Jimenez should have been getting ready for bed, but her mother and her father noticed that Josephine hadn't left her room. So they went in to look for her, and that's when they realized that Josephine wasn't at home. Josephine was not the type of teenager who would just leave her house without telling her family. So immediately, sheer panic set in. The family jumped into action. They were looking, calling, and asking anyone who might know about Josephine if they had heard from her. When no one had answers, Maria, who's Josephine's mother, called 911 to report her daughter missing. Missing persons posters immediately went up, and authorities interviewed all of Josephine's close friends, but no one knew anything. Minutes turned into hours, turned into days, and 10 days after Josephine was last seen, devastating news arrived. On October 22nd, 2019, detectives discovered Josephine's body partially buried in a very rural orchard in the southern part of Madera County, just miles from her home. An autopsy failed to determine an exact cause of death, but it did reveal injuries that were consistent with suffocation. In that moment, this missing persons case transformed into a murder investigation. Investigators combed the orchard crime scene for clues, but it was clear that Josephine's body had been left in haste, partially buried. It was almost as if someone had tried to conceal the crime, but immediately fled before finishing because maybe they were scared that someone saw them. From the beginning, Josephine's family and friends racked their brains about who could have lured Josephine out of her home that night. Josephine hadn't left behind a note, and there was no obvious sign of where she went or of a struggle. But as investigators interviewed her classmates and her inner circle, a few puzzling clues emerged. So, teenagers can sometimes fib for their friends. And while initially none of Josephine's friends reported anything unusual, after, her body was discovered, her friends came forward with a critical piece of information that they had failed to tell investigators. You see, prior to disappearing, Josephine had mentioned plans to sneak out of her house on that night, October 13th, which was the night before her mom discovered she was missing. According to these friends, Josephine confided in them that she was planning to meet up with an older man that night. The man, Josephine supposedly said, was a family friend, someone she seemingly trusted. The plan for Josephine was to go out for a late dinner at the local Wingstop. Well, once investigators knew this immediately raised eyebrows. Why would a 16-year-old girl be meeting a much older man, even if he was a family acquaintance? And why so late? Why did she have to sneak out of her house? Why hadn't she told her parents? There were so many questions. Well, a friend had an even bigger clue. She had been video chatting with Josephine when the man rolled up to Josephine's house to pick her up. And the friend, acting on intuition, she felt uneasy. So she took a snapshot, on her phone of the video chat. And in the snapshot, you could see a picture of the rear side of the man's car, including a little bit of tire. And it was a gray vehicle. So even though this wasn't a huge clue, it was still a clue. Detectives acted swiftly. They obtained surveillance footage from the Wingstop on the night of October 13th. They were hoping to spot Josephine, maybe spot this older gentleman, maybe spot anything. But after getting that video surveillance, it was hours of video surveillance, police found no sign that Josephine ever went to the restaurant that night. There was no footage of Josephine inside or outside or even in the parking lot of Wingstop. The investigation then turned from finding if Josephine had been at Wingstop to identifying this older family friend that Josephine intended to meet. Josephine's family thought long and hard. Who could she have possibly meant when she said this older male family friend? Well, they couldn't figure out who it was. At the same time, there were two young men in Josephine's life who became persons of interest. There was a boy named Ethan and a boy named Tyler, and they were both acquaintances of Josephine. Ethan was a high school classmate of Josephine's, but once they looked into him, he had an alibi and he was quickly eliminated as a suspect. But Tyler, his case was a little bit different. Tyler was one of Josephine's close friends, and on the day before she went missing, which was October 13th, he had spent time with her that very day. In fact, Tyler admitted, hey, me and Josephine, we were hanging out together that Sunday. And according to Tyler, the two of them spent the afternoon hanging out, and then he returned her home by dinner time that evening. He claimed that he last saw her when he dropped her off. Now, this was a very important detail because if true, it meant that Josephine left home later that night after seeing Tyler, presumably to meet this mystery man at Wingstop. However, detectives weren't entirely satisfied with Tyler's initial account because as they dug deeper, Tyler had basically said, I dropped her off and then I went back home. But it turns out he didn't go back home. He failed to tell the investigators that instead of going back home, he went to hang out with his cousin, an older guy who happened to drive a gray car. Detectives followed up with Tyler's cousin, and he was like, yeah, he came to my house, and that was it. But when investigators learned that Tyler's cousin owned a gray car, they immediately thought back to that screenshot of Josephine's friend, or the screenshot that Josephine's friend took. They started wondering, could Tyler and his cousin have been the ones that Josephine planned to meet up with much later? Investigators obtained a warrant and they took a closer look at Tyler's cousin's car, that gray car. They also pulled records from automated license plate readers that were positioned around the city. By checking these records, police could trace where that gray sedan had been on the night of October 13th. And sure enough, when they pulled up that data, it revealed some telling timestamps. At around 9:30 p.m. on October 13th, a camera captured a gray silver sedan registered to Tyler's cousin heading in the direction of Josephine Jimenez's home. And that was right around the time that Josephine would have been leaving to meet up with the guy, because remember, Josephine was video chatting with her friend. Then later that same night, just after midnight, the same car, Tyler's cousin's gray vehicle, was picked up by another camera returning into Madeira from a road that leads out toward that rural area where Josephine's body was found. These discoveries sent a chill through the investigative team. They started to form a theory. Maybe Tyler and his cousin picked up Josephine and something went terribly wrong. However, just as detectives were building a case against Tyler and his cousin, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A new lead came in out of nowhere, a mind boggling tip from over 300 miles away at a Marine Corps base on the Southern California coast. In December of 2019, about 2 months after Josephine's murder, Madera County investigators received a phone call that would change everything. On December 10th, an NCIS agent out of Camp Pendleton reached out to the team investigating Josephine's murder. The agent on the line asked, "Are you investigating the death of a girl named Josephine Jimenez?" When the detectives were like, "Yes, we are," the NCIS agent dropped a bombshell. The Marines were investigating one of their own, a 19-year-old Marine, for a string of crimes involving social media and teenage girls. And they believed that this Marine might be connected to Josephine's disappearance. This was a stunning development. Up until that point, Josephine's case seemed like it might involve someone in her local circle, right? Tyler, his cousin, maybe somebody else. But now NCIS was indicating that an active duty Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton, which is in Oceanside, California, was under investigation for something called sextortion. And Josephine's name had come up in that context. Investigators in Madeira were floored. Who was this Marine and how did Josephine cross paths with him? The suspect was identified as Codi Slayton, a 19-year-old Marine originally from Madera County. That's right. He grew up in the same community as Josephine Jimenez. Detectives suddenly realized that this could be the older man that Josephine had planned to meet up with. And he wasn't just a random older guy. Josephine actually knew Codi Slayton in real life. Their families were indeed acquainted. Incredibly, one of Codi Slayton's step-siblings was among Josephine's best friends. The Jimenez family knew Slayton's family, and because of that connection, Josephine likely had seen Codi around over the years. He wasn't a complete stranger, which explains why she referred to him as a family friend. Even more disturbing, after Josephine went missing and was found murdered, Codi Slayton inserted himself into the mourning process. That's right. He actually attended Josephine's memorial vigil, standing alongside her family friends, and he was literally with them. At the candlelight vigil held on the steps of the county courthouse, Slayton was seen being one of the first people to lay down a candle in Josephine's honor. To everyone there, he looked like just another devastated friend of the victim, but no one realized at that time that the young Marine paying his respects was possibly her killer. So, how did NCIS zero in on Codi Slayton? It turned out that Codi Slayton had been the target of an ongoing investigation into online predatory activity. NCIS agents had uncovered a sextortion scheme involving Slayton and numerous young women and underage girls across California and possibly beyond. This Marine was allegedly using social media and text messages to prey on vulnerable girls, including 16-year-old Josephine Jimenez. Okay, I need to take a break right here because has anybody watched that Netflix documentary, Unknown Number? That documentary had me on the floor. I was not happy about it. But anyway, we can talk about that a different day. All right. This story kind of reminds me of that, but let's continue. Investigators later described Slayton as an online predator. His modus operandi, or his MO, was as follows. He would acquire private, sensitive, or explicit photos of teenage girls through deceit or theft. Then he would use those images to blackmail the girls. Slayton might start by posing as someone else or befriending a girl online, convincing her to share some personal photos, or perhaps even hacking into an account to steal personal pictures. Once he had something that was compromising on the girl, he would initiate a pressure campaign. He would contact the victim and make terrifying threats. Quote, now that I have this, if you don't give me what I want, I'll post these pictures everywhere. I'll show them to your family, end quote. Essentially, Slayton extorted his victims by threatening to ruin their reputations and relationships. What Slayton wanted in return varied, but it wasn't money. It was about power, control, and sexual gratification. In some cases, he demanded that the girls meet up with him in person or perform sexual favors. In other cases, he may have coerced them into sending more explicit material. It was a cruel game of exploitation, and 19-year-old Slayton had been tormenting multiple young women for months this way. At least one of his victims the NCIS knew of was underage, and during their inquiry, Slayton actually admitted that one of the girls he had targeted in this entire scheme was Josephine Jimenez herself. When NCIS investigators heard Josephine's name in Slayton's confession about the sextortion, they immediately recognized her name from news reports of her unsolved murder. That's why they contacted the Madera County Sheriff. They realized that this entire sextortion case and Josephine's homicide might have actually been connected. For Madera detectives, all the puzzle pieces suddenly fell into place. Armed with this new information, investigators immediately refocused their investigation on Codi Slayton. Remember, earlier their suspicions were on Tyler and his poor cousin, but now that they had the name Codi Slayton, Tyler and his cousin went out the window, which thank goodness, because they could have very easily been caught up with this entire case. As investigators looked into this further, it was very possible that the gray car that had been captured in the surveillance video, which remember they had originally said was Tyler's cousin or could have been Tyler's cousin, well, maybe it was Codi Slayton's car because he owns a silver Ford Fusion sedan. Investigators also learned that Slayton was on leave from the Marine Corps in mid-October 2019, and he was actually back home in Madera when Josephine disappeared. In other words, he had the opportunity. He was physically present in the area on October 13th. Detectives then ran his plates through the same license plate reader system that had tracked Tyler's cousin's car, and the results were even more damning. Slayton's car was recorded driving toward Josephine's neighborhood around 9:30 p.m. Then, just after or just before 10 p.m., Slayton's license plate reader was picked up near the Wingstop location, remember, where Josephine was supposed to go. Finally, after midnight, Slayton's car was recorded returning from the direction of the rural orchard area where Josephine's body would later be found. Which is crazy because this is all the same things that were beginning to implicate Tyler and Tyler's cousin. With this new mountain of information and mountain of evidence and a prime suspect identified, Madera County authorities coordinated with NCIS to bring Codi Slayton into custody. On January 16, 2020, about 3 months after Josephine was killed, detectives traveled to Oceanside, California, and interviewed Slayton, who at that point was already detained by NCIS on those unrelated charges. After that interview, bolstered by the new evidence they had gathered, Madera County Sheriff's detectives formally arrested Codi John Slayton and charged him with the murder of Josephine Jimenez. When investigators first sat down with Codi Slayton, he denied any involvement. Then Slayton gave a version of events that started out somewhat innocent. This is the kind of an investigation where he says nothing happened. He says he wasn't even there. And then he kind of gives a little bit until he just basically digs his own grave, basically. So this next time, Slayton claimed that Josephine had texted him that night, October 13th, asking him hey, what's going on? You want to get something to eat? According to Slayton, the plan was to go to Wingstop, but just as they were driving past Wingstop, Josephine had a change of heart and she didn't want to get food after all. Slayton told police that Josephine was you know what, let's go somewhere more private to hang out. So Slayton was then okay, let's go on a drive. Slayton described how he drove Josephine out to a quiet road near some vineyards, an area outside of town where they could have privacy in his car. In fact, the location he described was only a few miles from where Josephine's body was ultimately discovered. I mean, this is a huge red flag, but let's go with it, right? Slayton then claimed that he and Josephine spent some time, getting intimate together in the back of his seat, in the back of his car. I mean, he said they hooked up. And after this hookup, he said, well, after we hooked up, we called it a night. I drove her back home and I, no kidding, dropped her off. She was safe and sound. I saw her go into the house, and that was the last time I saw her. The detectives were like, that's a lie, but, let's go with it because, they were thinking the license plate reader showed his car never returned to Josephine's neighborhood. So they were like, tell us what really happened because we know something happened. At that point, Slayton paused the interview. He asked for a break because he wanted to think things over. And when he returned, and I don't think it was the same day, it may have been the next day, that was when he gave a new version of the story. Because remember, the story just keeps evolving. This story, however, did result in Josephine's death, but he claimed it was just an accident. Basically, he said it was rough sex gone wrong when Josephine was the one who wanted the rough sex and she was the one who asked him to choke her. And he said he didn't want to at first, but she started to get pissed off. So he was like, fine, I'll choke you. And then as he was choking her, he heard a pop. Slayton said he wasn't sure at first if she was still breathing. And then she started to make a gurgling sound. In his account, it dawned on him, oh crap, Josephine is dead, or she's at least dying right before my eyes. This moment, when he realized she was dead or dying, Slayton told investigators, this moment sent him into a panic frenzy. Realizing what he had done accidentally, Slayton decided to cover up the incident. He told the investigators that he drove Josephine's body into the orchard area, which was nearby, and he did this to hide evidence of her death. He did admit that he tried to bury her in a shallow grave. However, he claimed that he got spooked thinking that he heard something or he feared that someone saw him. And so he kind of just did a really rushed job and left the scene. And this aligns with how Josephine's body was found partially buried. As Slayton recounted this version of events, detectives had to contain their anger and utter disgust. They later said that they were sickened as they listened to this guy try to blame the victim for what happened to her. Based on all the evidence, detectives had a different theory of what really happened that night. They believed that Codi Slayton lured Josephine out under false pretenses, maybe using the threat of exposing something embarrassing. He picked her up in his car. She likely never really wanted to do anything intimate with him at all. And side note, it was reported that Josephine was not into boys, she was into girls, which made Slayton's version of what happened even odder. Slayton was someone that Josephine knew as an older brother figure. It's more plausible that at some point during the car ride or meetup, Josephine resisted Slayton's advances or threatened to report his extortion, and he became enraged. Detectives believe that Slayton deliberately strangled Josephine after she refused him or tried to stand up to him for his exploitation. Everything Slayton did afterward, the hurried burial, attending the vigil, lying to police, that was all in an effort to save himself. Regardless of which version one might believe, Slayton had now effectively confessed that he was with Josephine when she died and that he did in fact dispose of her body. That was enough for law enforcement to move forward with charges. Immediately after the interview, Codi Slayton was arrested by the Madera County detectives with, of course, the cooperation of NCIS, and he was booked on a charge of first-degree murder for the death of Josephine Jimenez. When the news broke that a Marine was arrested for Josephine's murder, the community was stunned. Josephine's alleged killer was not the friend everyone suspected, but rather he was a former Marine, one who had been in their midst and even mourned alongside them. The case against Slayton was strong. Prosecutors had his own admissions, digital evidence of his car movements, proof of his social media communications with Josephine, which I will get into in a little bit, And they also had evidence of other victims who were ready to testify about Slayton's sextortion scheme. In the face of this, Slayton eventually chose to plead guilty rather than go through a full trial. In May of 2023, more than 3.5 years after Josephine's life was taken, now 22-year-old Codi Slayton pled guilty to the charges related to Josephine's killing. This plea was part of an agreement to spare him a potential first-degree murder conviction. Instead, he was convicted of a lesser charge, and it was second-degree murder. In preparing for this episode, I read through a recent appellate opinion in this case, and I do want to point out that during the case, some prior uncharged misconduct was revealed, and it involved various other underage girls and women that Slayton was extorting. Now, I will change their names just to protect them, but there was one woman who I will call Elsa. She dated Slayton, and she said that he was into forceful, rough sex and that he liked to choke her during sex. He often forced her to have sex against her will, and he did a whole bunch of other things. At some point, this woman was forced to have sex with other persons, and those encounters were video recorded, and it was all linked back to our homeboy Slayton. Videos and images of this woman were also later found online. Additionally, money was mysteriously wired from her bank account into Slayton's bank account. There was another girl who I will call Georgia, and she told investigators that when she was between the ages of 13 and 14, she sent topless photos to Slayton. He would send her pictures of his penis, and after this, she began to receive anonymous harassing messages threatening to expose those pictures to her family. One of these messages was tracked back to Camp Pendleton 2 days after Josephine's murder. There was another girl who I will call Jewel, and she dated Slayton in 2017. Again, she said that he was forceful and made her engage in sex acts that she didn't want to. She also began receiving anonymous messages asking for nude photos, and that anonymous number would send her nude photos of her that she had shared with Slayton. Jewel's age was never given in the appellate opinion, but the harassment all stopped when her mother reached out to Slayton personally and told him she reported the messages to the police. Another girl, Chloe, same. She sent nude pictures to Slayton, and then all of a sudden she started getting these anonymous messages threatening to expose the pictures that she had sent to Slayton. Those pictures were also uploaded to a pornography site, and one of her male friends received a nude photo of her. Chloe would later begin a sexual relationship with Slayton, and it should be noted she didn't realize that he was the one sending the anonymous messages. She did describe, though, that he did enjoy rough sex. Another victim, Lucinda, exchanged numbers with Slayton. It does not appear that photos were ever exchanged between the two, but after giving Slayton her number, she started getting anonymous messages asking for nude photos. A sixth victim, who I will call Amanda, had sent nude photos to her boyfriend. Amanda and her boyfriend broke up, and then all of a sudden, she started getting anonymous text messages asking for nude photos. Investigators found that Amanda's ex and Slayton had communicated at some point, and so that was the connection there. And then there were the Lady Marines who fell victim to Slayton. The same month that Josephine was killed, 2 Lady Marines reported their bags stolen from their rooms on base. After their bags were stolen, one woman started to receive anonymous messages asking for nude photos in exchange for the return of her bag. So no kidding, somebody thought it was smart enough to be like, hey, lady, you send me a nude photo and I'll give you your bag back. This woman also got a note on her door threatening that if she reported the messages to authorities, she would not be seeing her bag ever again. The text included requests not only for nudes, but they were like, okay, listen, if you don't send nudes, let's just meet up for sex. I mean, what woman in their right mind would say yes to that? Like, that is freaking scary. But wait, the threatener or the anonymous caller got even crazier. He was like, if you don't send nudes and you don't meet up for sex, don't worry, because I will then share your social security card and your birth certificate to the highest bidder. The stolen bags? Guess what? They were found in Codi Slayton's mother flipping car. That's right. And Sadly, Josephine Jimenez had been a victim of this guy as well in more than one ways. On Slayton's laptop, investigators found nude photos of Josephine Jimenez. Y'all, this man was a monster, and there were various uncharged crimes, which I'm not even going to get into. At the end of the day, because Slayton pled guilty, there was no trial, but the judge had allowed or already allowed most of this uncharged misconduct to come into the trial had it been fully litigated. In late September 2023, the case finally concluded in a Madera County courtroom. At the sentencing hearing, emotions ran high as Josephine's family faced the man who destroyed their lives. Slayton, no longer a Marine and a convicted felon, was formally sentenced to 15 years to life in state prison for second-degree murder. This sentence means that he will serve a minimum of 15 years before he is even eligible for parole. And depending on the parole board decisions, he could remain incarcerated for life. Additionally, due to the sexual nature of his crimes, the judge ordered that Slayton register as a sex offender for the rest of his life, if he ever gets out of jail. He's kind of young, so he might. The prosecuting attorney in the case emphasized that given the circumstances, a predatory scheme against a minor, it was appropriate that Slayton be marked as a sex offender permanently. Josephine's family delivered powerful victim impact statements during the sentencing. Her older sister, Alexis Jimenez, spoke through tears about what was lost. Quote, "He destroyed my family. He took away the most beautiful soul," end quote. Josephine's uncle also wrote, quote, "The day I found out that she was gone broke me. I'm still broken now," end quote. When it was Jimenez's father's turn to speak, his name is Raymond, his grief and anger were evident. Facing the defendant, Raymond expressed outright hatred for the man who betrayed his family's trust and took his daughter's life. Quote, "I just have so much hate for this man, and I hope he never does come out again," end quote. Despite some disappointment at the length of the sentence, there was also gratitude. The family thanked law enforcement for their tireless work in capturing the man responsible. Prosecutors reassured the family that Slayton would be behind bars where he couldn't harm anyone else, and that justice, albeit imperfect, had been served. As one prosecutor put it, quote, "They are glad that he is now going to prison and there is justice for Josephine," end quote. In the end, Codi Slayton was shipped off to a California state prison to begin serving his time. According to prison records, he is incarcerated at the San Quentin State Prison facility with his first parole eligibility, sometime in 2030. The story of Josephine Jimenez is a heartbreaking example of how an online predator can infiltrate a community and shatter lives. It's also a cautionary tale. It's about hidden dangers that lurk on social media, even in seemingly friendly forms. Remember the chat that we had a few weeks ago with my friend about having friends online and online friends. I mean, yeah, online friends are super scary, but heck, even friends online can be dangerous. Josephine was a smart, loving girl with dreams of serving her country. That's right. She had expressed interest in joining the military. It's an irony not lost on anyone when her killer turned out to be a member of the Marine Corps. Her case highlights how vulnerable young people can be to exploitation, especially by someone who knows how to manipulate their trust or fear. In Josephine's memory, her family has advocated for educating parents and teens about the signs of online grooming and sextortion. The hope is that by sharing what happened to Josephine, others might recognize the red flags before it's too late. After all, if it could happen in this close-knit family with a predator who was literally a family friend attending church vigils, it could happen literally anywhere. So I want to take this moment to talk about how to talk to your kids about social media and sextortion. Josephine's case painfully illustrates the importance of talking to our kids about online safety. So here are some key points for parents and guardians on how to address these issues with kids from an early age, right? You got to start the conversation early and you have to keep it ongoing. Begin discussing online safety in an age-appropriate way as soon as your kid starts getting on the internet. Regularly revisit the topic as they get older. When conversations about online dangers are frequent and open, kids are more likely to feel comfortable sharing their online experiences with their parents. Number two, explain the difference between friends and friends. Make sure that kids understand that not everyone online is who they claim to be, and not everyone that you know in real life is who they claim to be once you start chatting with them online. Number three, set firm rules. They should not add new online friends or followers without parental permission, especially not adults that they don't know in real life. And even if they do know them in real life, adults should not be friending kids on any social media platform. Number four, emphasize no secrets and open communication. Predators love kids who keep secrets from their parents. Counteract this by assuring your kids that they can tell you anything, even if it makes them uncomfortable, and that you, even if you get a little bit mad, they are not going to get in trouble. Number five, discuss what sextortion is in clear terms that is age appropriate. Once your kids are old enough, preteens and teens, explain that sharing naked or even semi-naked photos or even photos of you in a bikini or information is information that can be used against them by people who want to do harm. Lay out the concept of sextortion. It is when someone might try to pressure you into sending them photos or doing things by threatening to post something private. Make sure that they know that anyone who does this is committing a crime and that they should tell a trusted adult immediately. Another thing that you can use as a tool is using real-world examples, like Josephine. Talk to them about what happened to Josephine. Read news stories to them to show them that this can happen and it does happen. And finally, encourage critical thinking about online content. Teach your kids to be wary of any requests for photos, any requests for personal details, or any requests for personal meetups that come through social media or texting. And remind them that it could be anonymous texting as well. The key here is to make sure that kids know that once you release a photo outside of, yourself, so you take a picture and you send it, that photo can never be brought back and it will live on the internet forever. This is not to say if you make a mistake. I always tell my kids, listen, I can fix just about anything. So just tell me and mommy will fix it. And I mean that even when they're adults. But it's important for them to know not to do it. But also, if they were to do it, in the case that they have a friend that maybe did it, let's talk about it. We can figure it out. It is not the end of the world. And there are a lot of people, a lot of kids and teenagers who end their life because they fear the embarrassment that will happen once that photo is released. There are so many pointers that I can give, but I think that those are enough for right now. By following these points and maintaining open dialogue with your kids, parents can better prepare their children to navigate social media safely. At the end of the day, it's about empowering your kids with knowledge that if anyone online ever threatens or pressures them, whether it's a stranger or even someone they know, they should never comply and they should seek help immediately. Predators like this guy, Codi Slayton, they rely on silence and fear. By talking openly and early with our kids, we take away these predators' power. All right, True Crime Army, thank you so much for tuning in today. I feel really strongly about keeping our kids safe online, and that's why I keep harping on it. I know some of you guys are like, oh, this is boring information. Definitely not talking about Josephine's story, because you guys would never say that about Josephine's story, right? Josephine's story is an eye-opening story, and it is a cautionary tale. But when I bring in authors and when I bring in educators, it's because it's an important topic. And it's important for us to talk to our kids about online safety. True Crime Army, that is it for today. If you want to support the show and listen to over 50 additional episodes, full-length episodes, join my Patreon at patreon.com/militarymurder. You can also go on there and join online for free. And occasionally, I will be doing a few freebies for my free members. Shout out to all my listeners who are always sending me case recommendations. I heard about Josephine's story from one of my listeners who watched the Paula Zahn episode that came out recently. In addition to Paula Zahn, my sources for today's episode include a 2025 appellate opinion and reporting by ABC News, Investigative Discovery, and the website Child Rescue Coalition. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.